This week, things get pretty deep. And while a lot of people want to resist deeper emotions or getting things deep, there's something really enjoyable about this. I would phrase this week as also somewhat of a summertime sadness. And a lot of this week, especially once we get to Saturday, so make sure you stick around to watch Saturday, there's this level of knowing what you have to do from here. So let's go ahead and get started talking about it. Welcome back to the Astrology Report. My name is Cam White, and this week we are talking about June 24th through June 30th of 2024. We have quite a bit going on this week, and like I said in the beginning, this week offers a lot of deep emotional reflection, and personally, I'm really looking forward to it. We start Monday off with the moon in Aquarius. The moon will make a first trine to Jupiter, and then it's going to make a square to Mars. So the way I would phrase this is there's going to be this overexcitement. There's going to be this kind of inspiration of ideas and how to do things. And that's the moon connecting with Jupiter and Gemini, right? Jupiter's all about expansion. It's in the sign of Mercury. There's all of these ideas that we've got going on. And with the moon connecting to it, we're like really emotionally invested into that. But then the moon will make a square to Mars. While we have all of these ideas and all this inspiration, there's this lack of taking action with it. There's this feeling maybe overwhelmed with all of the possibilities of what to do. When the moon is in Aquarius, the moon is in a fixed sign. And the moon, well, fixed signs like to keep things fixed. They don't really like to change things. So the moon in Aquarius is kind of like, this is the way I want to see things. This is the way I want to do things. And as it trines Jupiter, there's an overabundance of information, of ideas, of ways to do those things. But as the moon makes a square to Mars, there's this lack of initiative. There's this lack of wanting to start things. And there's this frustration with things aren't moving forward the way that you might want them to. So the way I would look at Monday is you're going to have a lot of inspiration, a lot of ideas, a lot of things happening, but actually applying any of those ideas or actually taking action is going to be a lot more of a struggle. And so on Monday, feel free to have those ideas. Don't let yourself get too frustrated with not taking action on Monday. That's okay. Do what you can, but don't beat yourself up over something that like you just can't do. And then we get to Tuesday, and the only thing we have going on Tuesday is the moon in Aquarius is just going to be making a square to Uranus. Like I said for yesterday, the moon is in Aquarius. It's in a fixed sign. It wants to keep things the same. But Uranus, which is about instability, random ideas, random events, revolution, it's also in a fixed sign. And so if fixed signs want to keep things the same, but we have a planet that is about like not keeping things the same in that sign, it can feel a lot more disruptive. The moon making that square to Uranus is like, just expect to have a disruption along regarding things that you want to keep the same, that you want to keep things fixed with. So Tuesday, I feel like isn't as frustrating as Monday in terms of not taking action. But Tuesday is going to kind of force you to maybe change your perspective, where we can all be very stubborn. The fixed signs are very stubborn. I think I talked about Aquarius and Taurus being really stubborn, and someone's like, well, Leo's a fixed sign too. I'm a Leo. I'm very stubborn, and I'm not afraid to admit that. And there's times where that's very good, like being, headstrong in a certain position is a good quality at times. There are times in our lives where our qualities are good and they serve us, and there are other times where the qualities that we have are bad and don't necessarily serve us. But the way I look at Tuesday is the moon squaring Uranus is going to be a disruption with things that we want to keep stable. Now, if you're someone that wants everything to be stable, I could look at this as maybe bad. But if you're someone that is stuck in a rut, that is looking for maybe a disruption to get yourself out of that rut, then I would like Tuesday, or I should say Tuesday is a lot more better for you if you want to use that as inspiration to get out of a rut. Because as the moon squares Uranus, you're not getting out of that without some sort of emotional disruption, without some sort of change in plans that you had going on. And even though the way I would look at this is the moon in Aquarius squaring Uranus and Taurus is like, we want to keep things the way that we want to, that option is not available to us. So it's going to be important to be able to like go with the flow and change your pace according to whatever information is presented to you. And then we get to Wednesday. I'm really looking forward to Wednesday. We have the moon ingressing into Pisces, and then it will make a square to Jupiter. It will then trine Venus, and it will sextile Mercury. But we have one of our main highlights on for this week on Wednesday, which is Mercury trining Saturn. So the way I would break this down is things are going to get pretty weird. Things are going to get pretty spiritual. I think over the course of Wednesday, our minds are going to start fixating on what we know is important, like connecting more on a deeper level of like, okay, this is what I must do. This is what is mine to do. And there's a lot of emotional maturity that happens on Wednesday. Now, last week I would have talked about, with the sun moving into Cancer, or I should say with Mercury and Venus moving into Cancer and the moon moving into Scorpio, it was like the splash zone. This is very similar, but this is more of like the sauna zone. Like we're kind of getting into a humid place. We're not getting, just wet with gross, water. There's something, relaxing about this. It relieves the tension. It relieves the dryness. The other thing I want to talk about on Wednesday is I'm posting my new song. A lot of you have checked out and supported my music, which I'm very, very grateful for, and it's had a very specific sound to it. It's been very heavy. This song that's coming out on Wednesday, I chose this chart for this song. There's a few things I didn't do according to correct, electional astrology, but this song is very emotional. This song is very different from my other songs, and I really think you guys are going to enjoy it. So if you haven't already, check out my Spica YouTube page, check out my Spica Spotify. Make sure you follow me and keep up with it. And of course, I'll be posting it on here. But I'm really excited for this song because, number one, I love it. But number two, the astrology of posting it in the day that this is, it's just really exciting for me. There's a lot of emotion in the song, and there's a lot of emotion in the astrology this day. But as the moon goes into Pisces, what I like about the Pisces sign is, again, it's Jupiter, right? So there's a lot of spiritual aspects to it, a lot of religious aspects to it. But it's in this water sign. And again, I keep talking about the difference between Sag and Pisces. Sagittarius is like the external manifestation type, and Pisces is more of like the internal. Like Sagittarius is yang, Pisces is yin. So there's something about going inside, going more internal with the moon going into Pisces. But the moon will first make a square to Jupiter, and then it will trine Venus and sextile Mars. I think I might have said sextile Mercury in the beginning. Sorry if I had said that incorrectly. But the moon, while it's in Pisces, will first make a square to Jupiter. With Jupiter and Gemini, we have all of this information. We have all of these ideas, and there's things going left and right. The moon in Pisces, I would argue, is a moment where we can kind of say no to something. Like, things might sound rational or logical, but when we navigate, like when we really look within, we might be able to listen to our intuition and say, I don't know if this is the right thing. Maybe I need more time to think about this thing. The moon in Pisces, if the moon is connected, if the moon is like our bodies and what we're connected to, and it's in Pisces, right? Like it's like this spiritual, emotional sign. It might be hard to navigate what we're feeling, but I think with the moon in Pisces scoring Jupiter and Gemini is like we feel like we should say no to an opportunity. We feel like we should say no to expansion or these ideas, but it's uncertain, it's unclear. And so I feel like with the moon squaring Jupiter, there is this level of like, I don't know if I like this, but I don't necessarily have a logical rationale behind why I'm saying no. There's just something in my gut saying, maybe take a pause on this, not make a decision on this right now. I think that is probably going to be your best move with the moon in Pisces squaring Jupiter and Gemini. There's just too much information that you have to weed out. You don't want to make impulse decisions. But then the moon will make a trine to Venus, and it will also sextile Mars. So with the moon making that trine to Venus, what I like about this is, again, Venus is about pleasure and fun and connection. She's in Cancer. This is a very emotional sign, very protective sign. And there is this like, okay, rather than me expanding on things, how can I take care of what's in front of me? How can I enjoy what I have more, again, in front of me? Rather than worrying about the shiny new object, it's like, can we treasure and enjoy what is precious to us here in the moment? The moon in Pisces making that trine to Venus is like, okay, I'm going to say no to expansion, and I'm going to enjoy more of what I have in front of me. And then the moon will make a sextile to Mars. Now, I don't find this sextile all that important. With Mars and Taurus in the mix, this is taking things slow, taking things steady. We want to be fixated with our actions, and that might be difficult. Mars is in detriment in Taurus, where, we're feeling stubborn, we're feeling slow, and there's going to be some issues with that as we go on through the next 2 weeks, actually really for the next 3 weeks. But the moon in Pisces sextiling Mars and Taurus, I think it's okay to enjoy the slow beat of things. I remember being a kid and, all the types of weird work I'd have to do working for my stepdad. And, we used to bale hay, and we had to been at least 100 acres of a field that we used to bale hay for. And at the time I hated it. It was it's hot summer day in like Montana. I don't know if you've ever baled hay before, but it sucks. You're sneezing every 5 minutes. There's about 10,000 grasshoppers all over you. But what really made it fun was my stepbrother and his cousins. We would just like make fun of each other, throw shit at each other. And sure, it was slow, hard work, but we enjoyed the moment rather than being like, oh, we don't want to do this and having a bad attitude with it. We just enjoyed the moment for what it was. And I really look at this moon in Pisces sextiling Mars and Taurus as like, hey, you don't need to go fast right now. Enjoy the present moment. Be present at this time. But we also have the highlight of Mercury trining Saturn. And this is what I referred to when I was talking about there being some sort of emotional maturity or our minds connecting and knowing what is important. On Saturday, Saturn's going to go retrograde, which is the big highlight this week. But as Mercury makes a trine to Saturn, we're mentally connecting with both what is real and with what is ours to do. Mercury is about, again, communication in our minds. It's in the sign of Cancer, which the sign of Cancer is technically mute. And with Mercury in Cancer, things can go a little bit more internal. And what sucks about with Mercury being about our minds and things going internal is like we can kind of spiral, we can kind of overthink our emotions and get very defensive because we're really inside of our heads. And when I say inside of our heads, we're much more like inside of like, again, like our emotional defense systems. But as Mercury trines Saturn, there's a level of emotional maturity that comes here. And it's not like the moon making connections here. Yes, the moon is in Pisces kind of facilitating some of this stuff, but Mercury is about our ideas and our mind, and Saturn's about reality, maturity, growth. I shouldn't say growth, but like growth in that sense of discipline, maturity, being an adult, taking care of our shit. And I just think Mercury trining Saturn is, we're kind of making the mental connection here of like, okay, like I can grow up, I can take this a little bit more seriously, and I know what's important here. And what I like about Saturn and Pisces and all this water stuff is it, like Saturn in something like Capricorn is so much more easy to understand on the surface. It is like, hey, do your job, show up to work on time, and you'll climb the corporate ladder. It's very simple. Just follow the rules. Saturn in Pisces is like, it's not about the external rules or the external world. It's about how do you handle things on the inside? How do you handle discipline? How do you discipline yourself? Can you control the inside? Are you too negative about certain situations? Are you beating yourself up about certain situations that you don't need to do anymore? And so I look at Mercury trining Saturn as like, okay, let's be real here. And not like, it's not fire stuff. This is an excitement and energy. And it's not Aquarius or air sign stuff where it's like super intellectual. And it's not earth sign stuff where it's just kind of, you know, on the surface, it's physical, it's literal, it's water stuff. It's like, hey, let's examine on the inside. Why do we feel this way? And I like Mercury trining Saturn for just having that mental connection of like, I know what I have to do here, and I have the emotional maturity to be able to handle this because I know what is important to me right now, and I know what I must take care of. And then we get to Thursday, and I really think Thursday is just kind of a add-on to Wednesday because on Thursday, the moon will still be in Pisces, and it's going to conjoin Saturn and make a trine to Mercury. So I feel like on Wednesday, we get some sort of information that allows us to have those thoughts, but then the moon conjoining Saturn and then trining Mercury is like us actually following through with it. It's like when we make a decision in our lives, it's easy to make that decision. But then the first step of what it means to make that decision, the actions that we take after making that decision, that is always the most like difficult. The first step is always the most difficult step, no matter what you do in life. And I look at the moon conjoining Saturn and trining Mercury as like, okay, we made that decision on Wednesday. We had the certainty on Wednesday. Now we have to follow through with the emotional, I don't want to say whirlwind, but the emotional aspect of following through with it. It's like, okay, if you make a decision that I'm going to eat better, I'm going to go to the gym, it's easy to make that decision. But that first day of saying like, okay, I'm going to wake up early, I'm going to go even if I don't want to. That is how I look at the moon conjoining Saturn, trining Mercury. It's like, okay, this is the decision that you made. Can you do it? Can you concentrate? Can you be emotionally disciplined? And the moon conjoining Saturn is a little bit like harsh. The moon in Pisces always reminds me of like very like childlike wonder. And there's times when you're a kid where, you know, your innocence goes away because you saw something bad or, you know, your parents yelled at you or something like that. And, you know, as a child, you might have internalized that, made it about you, whatever. But the moon conjoining Saturn is like, there is a certain point where you have to kind of grow up. And I don't look at this as bad. I really don't. I look at this as like, take this seriously. Don't be afraid to go a little bit deeper and say, okay, I have to put the limits on this and I have to be disciplined about this. And I'm okay with that because I know that this is important to me. So then we get to Friday. On Friday, the moon will conjoin Neptune. And then the moon will move into Aries, which then it will sextile Pluto and sextile Jupiter. But then the moon will conjoin the North Node. And again, the moon conjoining Neptune and the moon going into Aries happens like at like midnight in Mountain Central Time. So really late Thursday night, really early Friday morning. But throughout Friday day, the moon will sextile Pluto, sextile Jupiter, and then it will conjoin the North Node at the same time it squares the sun. And we also have a highlight on Friday, which is Venus sextiling Mars. The way I would look at this is there's a part of Thursday night into Friday morning, which is really tapping into our creative vision, not being afraid of, you know, having a vision, being creative, looking things through a very idealized or romanticized way. And we're going to take that energy, we're going to use it to push through a lot of things. The only issue is we're probably going to be tired. It's going to be hard to push through these things, but you have to push through. So like I said, kind of at the beginning of the week with the moon in Aquarius squaring Mars is like, we just don't have the energy. I think that energy really comes in on Friday because as the moon conjoins Neptune late is like, again, we're tapping into that creative vision. We have that imagination. Use that imagination. It's very important in our lives. Like as adults, we just don't have that imagination. Sometimes I really think back when I was a kid or even when I was like 18 and I had this like anything is possible mentality. And as an adult, you just kind of, it just goes away. And I look back oftentimes of like, why did that go away? That didn't harm me. Like, don't get me wrong. There was things that I just didn't know and maybe had too high of expectations, but having a creative imagination over what is possible, what I can do, all that did was inspire me. All that did was dissolve the limitations of what I thought was real or what I thought I could do. And when you think you can do anything, you kind of can. So as the moon conjoins Neptune, tap into that late Thursday night or early Friday morning. As the moon goes into Aries, again, now we're more emotionally charged. Now we're kind of ready to take some action. Yeah, Mars is in Taurus, but the sun's in Cancer, Mercury's in Cancer, Venus is in Cancer, and they're all ruled by the moon. So the moon going into Aries is just kind of charging all of this stuff up. The moon will make a sextile to Pluto, like, okay, tapping in a little bit to that power. And the moon will also sextile Jupiter in Gemini. As the moon sextiles Jupiter in Gemini, this is kind of gaining a little bit more insight with that information that we got maybe on Monday. This is kind of like, okay, what information that I got on Monday can I actually apply on Friday? As the moon, after it leaves that sextile with Jupiter, it's going to conjoin the North Node. We are going to be cranking up the emotional output levels. And when we are very emotionally invested into our work, it's easier to get triggered. It's easier to get sensitive, like when things don't go your way. And I would really recommend like just having an awareness that that could be possible, that like, hey, you're really like emotionally invested into this and all that. And that's a good thing a lot of the times, but that also could mean that there's a lot more sensitivity to it. And I don't want that sensitivity to anger you or upset you or get you so worked up and frustrated when things aren't exactly working the way that you want to. And the moon will make a square to the sun. This is what I was kind of bringing up when it comes to like, we're going to be tired. Mars in Taurus is like, again, we're just being as consistent as we can. We don't have the highest energy ever, but we're just being consistent. And that moon making that square to sun is like, it's a waning moon. We're getting ready for the dark moon in Cancer, the new moon in Cancer. So the energy is lower here, but the moon is in Aries. So there's this last push where it's like, let's say the evening is getting late, it's starting to get dark. But, if you've ever worked on like a farm or whatever, there's always work to do. And you might be tired, but you've got to do that work. And it sucks, but it is rewarding at the end of the day. That's how I look at Friday, is like, hey, this sucks. I don't want to do this. I'm tired, but I've got one last little push of energy to get all of this done. Now, what I do like is Venus will make a sextile to Mars. And like I said, this is a highlight for Friday. And Venus in Cancer sextiling Mars in Taurus is like something I would argue is, have your emotional energy invested into it. Like you don't want to, like for example, I used to have a 2001 Ford Escape. I had so many issues with this truck. It was one of the first vehicles I had of my own that like I learned a lot about vehicles because I didn't have money for a mechanic. So I did a lot of the work with like me and my sister's fiance at the time. And it was like there was this late December night. It had been like 10 p.m. We're like 7 AutoZone trips deep into it. I think we're changing the I can't remember the name of it, not the spark plugs, but the cylinders that actually go into the spark plugs go into. And we wanted to get it done. It was cold, it was late, but it was just kind of like, rushing it doesn't make any sense at the moment. We had to enjoy it for what it was. And we had like a fun time. We always crack jokes and, beat each other up and shit like that. And so I look at Venus in Cancer sextiling Mars and Taurus is like, hey, things might be slow right now. You have something you've got to do. Enjoy the process of it. Like, don't be afraid to have some fun with it. Or for example, like, let's say you have kids. I grew up pulling weeds fucking every weekend. All I did was yard work as a kid. Literally half of my childhood was yard work. And, my mom would sometimes, actually do it because she has a fucking son now. She would just be like, Cameron, you go do the yard work. But she would join in and we had things to do. But for whatever reason, when my mom was involved, there was something more fun about it. And yes, it was a lot of work. And yes, it was annoying, but we could enjoy it then and there. That's how I would really look at Friday. Then we get to Saturday. Saturday is arguably, in my opinion, the biggest highlight of this week. The way I would describe this is a major shift in knowing what is ours to do. There's a lot of creative problem solving that happens on Saturday. And there's a lot of having to take uncomfortable action, but again, we have to do it. So Saturday, we have The moon making a square to Venus and Mercury. Mercury, one of the highlights that we have on Saturday is Mercury is making a sextile to Uranus, but we have Saturn going retrograde. Now, I want to really emphasize Saturn retrograde. I love talking about Saturn retrograde. It's one of my favorite things that I feel like in my own astrologer creative mind that I've got it dialed in. If you haven't watched my Saturn and Pisces video yet, feel like you're new to the channel, make sure you check that out. I recorded that way back in March of 2023. But as Saturn moves into a new zodiac sign, right? Saturn's about discipline, restrictions, limitations, maturity. And Saturn moves into a new zodiac sign. It's like you start a new job. Saturn moving direct is you're getting on the site training. You're learning what you're responsible over. You're learning how, like, if I used to work in a lot of restaurants. So like you're learning the POS system, you're learning the menu, you're seeing how things, get handled. Saturn going retrograde is like your first 2 to 3 weeks at the job, not being trained on the spot. So you're on your own, but there's still a level of like learning the ropes. You should know what the menu is at this point. You should know how to go through the POS system. But let's say someone orders a burger in a way that you didn't know you could do. There might be questions about how you actually do it. Saturn going retrograde is you're no longer having that on-the-spot training. What has been going on since November of 2023? November is when Saturn stationed direct. So again, Saturn moves forward. We're being introduced to all of these, things that we have to do. Saturn goes retrograde. Now we're on our own. Then Saturn stations direct and moves through that same part of the sky again. It moves through its shadow phase where it's like, okay, you've been on the job for a month or two now. You get it at this point. And now you feel a lot more comfortable with your responsibilities. You feel a lot more comfortable with what is yours to do. But then Saturn moves out of shadow and moves into a new territory of the sky. That is when, again, now that we're on the job for a while, let's say like I was a host, like I went from being like host, busboy, server kind of a thing. Let's say you're a host at this restaurant, you get it, but now you're getting on the spot training for being a server. You want to become a server now. So it's the same idea. You are still at the same restaurant, still kind of know everything, but now you're learning like how to do the serving part of it. So, and that's been happening since I believe Saturn left shadow around February or March. So around that time, where did you feel like you were taking on new responsibilities, new duties? And since then, we've been introduced to all this stuff. And now it's like we're not getting on the spot training. We know exactly what we have to do. There's no whining or complaining. And that's what's going on. I have Saturn retrograde. If you have a planet natally retrograde, whenever that planet goes retrograde, it's kind of like the wind is a little bit more in your sails during that time. It's more familiar. So I like Saturn retrograde. This is saying like, okay, I've learned the ropes. Now I get to do it on my own. And that's what I was talking about when it comes to like there being a major shift in where our responsibilities lie and where we have to be more serious and more disciplined. But as the moon, while it's in Aries, makes a square to Venus and Mercury, there's this kind of like uncomfortable action. There's this like, all right, the moon's in Aries, and it's squaring Venus and it's squaring Mercury where, for example, like let's say you have children and let's say you're not the most disciplined parent or you don't want to be, right? Like we all have this idea if we become parents or if you are parents, like we don't want to be like our parents. We don't want to be mean and angry, but there are times where you got to discipline your kid. Like you can't just let him be a little shithead. And so the moon in Aries squaring Venus and Mercury is kind of like, hey, I have to break some hard news to you. I've got to tell you how it is. You're probably going to be a little bit sensitive about it, but we can all be, emotionally mature about this. I feel like the moon in Aries has a lot more to do with confrontation, has a lot more to do with like, fights and conflicts. And as it squares Venus in Cancer and Mercury in Cancer is, whoever is receiving that conflict, whoever is receiving that information may not take it all that well. And that's okay. The context dependent here, it may not be your issue. But there is this, like, our emotions are really fixated, or I shouldn't say fixated, but they are in an area that deals with confrontation, and it's not in alignment with the planet of communication. It's not in alignment with the planet of fun. So there is this kind of having to confront something, and we may not want to do it, but it's like feedback is often harsh, but always fair, right? So the other highlight that we have on Saturday is Mercury sextiling Uranus. Now, what I love about this is after the moon makes that like square to Venus and Mercury, and there's kind of like this, oh, they said that, and you maybe get a little bit insecure. Mercury sextiling Uranus provides a solution. Like, it's just kind of like, let me try this real quick, or all of a sudden this works out. So just Saturday, just know that there's going to be kind of this weird confrontation, and it might make you feel uncomfortable, but there's a solution 5 minutes later. There's a way to get out of it that is very creative. But I think the bigger part of Saturday is Saturn goes retrograde. It's like, okay, This is a bigger shift, and what is yours to do? What does Pisces rule in your chart? Now that's going backwards. Now you kind of know what work is cut out for you for here on out. And then we get to Sunday. On Sunday, the moon literally just ingresses into Taurus and makes a square to Pluto. But then that square to Pluto only lasts a little while, and the moon just hangs out in Taurus and is not really making too many aspects as of yet. Sunday is a lot about just slowing down. I think over Friday and Saturday, there's a lot of getting things done, taking aggressive action, and doing things that are uncomfortable. But I think as the moon goes into Taurus on Sunday, it just reminds me of a Sunday in the summer. You know, enjoy the barbecue, watch the football game. Football's not on Sundays in the summer. Watch the baseball game. I don't know. There's something about just kind of relaxing. And, you know, I want to come back to why I kind of said that this is a deeper / summertime sadness kind of week. There's so much about this week that we tap into, like our real, like, again, all parts of our emotions. Again, we got stuff in Pisces, we got stuff in Cancer, and that could create a lot of sensitivity. But in my opinion, with Saturn going retrograde here and all that stuff, this is just tapping more into, again, a lot more spiritual and emotional discipline. And I think by the time we get to Sunday, there is this kind of like slow down. All right. Like, for example, if you've ever cried your eyes out or had a really intense emotional thing, like the two best things you could do is like sleep. You ever like cry your eyes out because you're so angry or upset and you just take the world's best nap, or eat some food. Oftentimes when I have to make a very serious decision, or I feel uncomfortable about doing something, I go and get a meal, and it's just like, it grounds me. It helps me stay a little bit more centered. And that's what I like Sunday for. The moon will make a square to Pluto. So there is this kind of like, you know, power struggle with like, oh, do I want to be comfortable? I'm not allowed to be comfortable. I'm not allowed to chill out for a minute, but I'm giving you permission to chill out on Sunday. Now, when we get to next week on Monday, when the moon conjoins Mars, you may not have that luxury, but Sunday, I want you to relax. But that brings us to next week. Next week, we have Mercury making a trine to Neptune. We have Mercury ingressing into Leo. It will also go opposite Pluto. We have Venus making a trine to Saturn. We have the new moon in Cancer, and we have Mars sextiling Saturn. We have a lot going on next week, and the vibe really starts changing once we get to next week with Mercury going into Leo, and we start getting all these fire sign transits. So with that being said, let me know what you guys think in the comments below, what you're excited for, what you're not looking forward to. Make sure you like the video. It does actually support the channel. And if you haven't already, subscribe. Sometimes I feel like YouTube unsubscribes people from me because my subscriber numbers are really, really weird. But anyway, I love and appreciate you guys. I'll be seeing you next week.